Previously on Mars.
We're talking about suicide and suicide prevention.
There are a couple of definitions for suicide. The one that comes to mind is when someone takes their own life. We say complete an action that causes the end result is death.
But I understand what you're saying in terms of looking to change the narrative in terms of the terminologies that is used. So I will say that, my brother died by suicide.
Yes. So you said September 28th. How old was he?
He was 48. He was 48 years old at the time. He was married and with two young kids. We were extremely close. And my brother was, in many ways, an overachiever. He had like 2 master's degrees. He lectured in small business entrepreneurship at St. George's University. At the time of his passing, he was a foundation member of Heritage Theatre. So Asquith was diagnosed with they call clinical depression in the first year of university in Cuba.
This week, we continue the discussion on suicide, exploring the difference between self-harm and suicide. Part 2 of the suicide discussion starts now.
Knowing that your brother died by suicide and he lived with a mental illness for how many years, how do you take care of yourself and how do other siblings take care of themselves so that, it's not something that's hidden. So, like you tell the family, you tell the children, okay, so your uncle died by suicide. We have to be vigilant. We have to be aware. What is the conversation like?
Right. So we very conscious of it. It's a conversation that we have among all the siblings. We're very close. It's a very close family and the friends. So we ask, questions about it. Because before, it's very hush-hush. And then you try to find out, were there family members before who suffered from mental illness? And then it's a conversation, and my mom said, she told us, her mom had, basically before she had what they used to call, walkabout. So she will just leave the house and go walking. And my mom, her mother was a Connaught, right? So that's the background for that family, the Connaughts. There was what they call walkabout. So she will just go walking, many times. And they believed, but then it went away. So she was cured by sea baths. So
no, but the sea the sea helps, right, Dr. Stephen? You want to chime in here about walkabout? Have you heard about it?
Not in that context, no. But as you were saying, the sea in itself has its healing properties, which I believe definitely.
Definitely. Okay, Mr. Duncan, I keep calling you doctor. You want to continue?
So this was the first, as I said, as far back as we were able to really go to understand that there was some, in terms of hereditary involvement there in the mental illness. And it's a conversation I think all of us have with our children. We were very concerned, speaking to them and looking at we figured that, from what I understand, look into the teenage years, just looking for just having a conversation with them and being very, very conscious of their actions and stuff, just to pass it away as teenage behaviors and stuff like that. But I think all of us who have kids been having that conversation and paying close attention. One thing I want to talk about with regards to depression and mental illness is that I think as Grenadians, not only Grenadians, but most people, we think that you could give somebody a tablet, medication, and that's going to solve the problem. We always think that, it's a magic bullet. And I want to really, really make this, and Dr. Stevens, I guess, will be able to speak about that, is that the medication that is given for some of the episodes of, depression and stuff, these are very, very powerful psychotropic drugs. Their moods, if we look at the television, and they say, yeah, this, then you could do about 20 different side effects.
Oh, yeah. How do I know?
Right. So one of the things that I said I will tell families who dealing with mental issues is that you got to be holistic. The family have to be involved and counseling. So the counseling have to be with medication, not just to give the individual the medication, but I think the family itself to have a good understanding of the side effects of it. Because my brother, and they always say when they change the medication, so one of the things that I learned during that period of time, that when you change in the medication, during that period of time is when the time things could go haywire.
Yes. Yes.
So and my brother that just changed his medication. It was it was like weeks or whatever. His medication was just changed.
Okay.
So, but we never really, as I said, we never really dealt with the counseling part of it and having that understanding. And I don't think. So I strictly said, recommend that not just a medication, but counseling going along that people understand the effects of what is being administered to the individual.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Duncan, for that moment there. Dr. Stephen, you've listened to Mr. Duncan speak about his brother, about depression and everything in between. What do you want to add that about suicide, depression per se, that people don't know or pay attention to?
I think, Mr. Duncan, sorry about your loss. It's 15 years, but it's when you lose a loved one, it's still sometimes it's still fresh and it's still there even after you grieve. And so when I think about kind of suicide, when we talk about depression is one of the major causes of suicide. And we think about the commonplace of depression, when you think about 20% of the world suffers from depression, right? And that's 1 in 5 people. So imagine if you have a group of 5 people in a room, at least one of them might be suffering from depression. And we're not even talking about mental illness. I think it's important to recognize, I do agree with Mr. Duncan when he says that it's not only medication, but also kind of the skill building, the therapy part of it, because medication is going to help in one way, but it's the skills to be resilient, it's the skills to understand your depression and understand your mental illness is going to be important in getting you to the next step, right? I think, go ahead.
No, I was going to ask you, could you share some? I mean, those are things that people would learn through counseling, the skills.
Mhm.
Could you share at least one or two things that if someone is viewing this and they are like thinking about, they're going through depression and, for example, and they are not aware, what are some of the signs of depression?
So depression, again, so there's some common signs of depression, right? Like sadness and hopelessness, loss of interest in what you were passionate about, feeling tired all the time, right? Those are some of the common signs of depression. But we also have to remember that everyone is unique in their own way, right? So you have to learn what your depression is like. You have to learn what your illness is like, and mental health is not something that we talk about in the Caribbean or even in Grenada. It's more of a taboo, like, you're going to Mungay, right? And that is again a kind of stigma, right?
Yes.
That we need to address, because when we think about it, mental health is an illness, just like we have hypertension and diabetes, right? And it needs to be looked at in the ways we look at that, right? Like when you have diabetes, you go to the doctor, you get medication or you get treatment for it. So too, mental health need to be looked at and treated, right? Untreated mental health can lead to things like the completion of suicide, or can lead to a very unhealthy life.
Something I was having a conversation with someone, and many a times people liken mental health conditions to one having diabetes or hypertension. And the person I was talking with was saying to me, so diabetes and hypertension, they can be avoided. So by diet and so on. So the person was saying, could a mental health condition be avoided by diet and other conditions and so on? And I was like, you have a point that leads to a question. There are some non-communicable diseases like diabetes and hypertension, and so that it can be hereditary, or you can avoid it. But there are some times where people might be depressed, have an issue of depression, and it never returns, or it's chronic, as Mr. Duncan's brother. So when someone says something like that, it could be avoided. Just beef up yourself, or do something, or they lighten it so much that they don't realize that it is chronic. It weighs you down. You don't want to get out of bed. You don't care if you brush your teeth or not. You don't care if you smell. You don't care, that sort of thing. So a lot of times people lighten mental health conditions because they have never interfaced with it or dealt with it themselves, or met someone, or if they do, they would just push them away. I can speak from experience.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think because of the lack of knowledge, right? Ignorancy, it is where we don't know how to treat it. We don't know, even as family members, we sometimes, what we'll tell them, what do you have to be sad about? What do you right? You have a house, you have kids, you have food to eat, you have a job, you have right?
The food, clothing, and shelter, the Maslow.
Right. And but it is it is an illness, and it affects the mind, it affects the brain to the point where you're not, if it's untreated especially, it's where it can cause death. Folks can go into depression and not come out.
Mhm. And when you bring up family, there are times that family think that they're helping, but in essence, there is that word pity that comes in. And someone who's dealing with depression or even any other mental health condition, he or she does not want pity. They want understanding and an ability to live their life as anyone else. Granted, one is taking medication, and medication, as Mr. Duncan pointed out, it has side effects. If you're taking medication for diabetes, there are side effects. Hypertension, there are side effects. And psychotropic drugs have the side effects. The kidneys, you don't know what's going on, So I think that there is so much to do where mental health conditions are concerned, depression, suicide to be exact. Would you consider, like, okay, I don't have data for it, but I've spoken with a few people, and they are saying that suicide ideation is very common among our young people.
Regarding suicide, do you know of persons who commit like self-harm?
Yes, I do.
And how do you feel about that?
At first, right, I would always ask myself, why would they do it? Like, what go through their head while they're doing it, right? But recently, I went through this care counselor training for 3 days, and we learned about self-harm, suicide, being judgmental, being confidential, this type of stuff I learned, and I get to understand why they feel that way, what they go through. So before I used to judge, but now I do not judge. I actually try to talk to them, right, as my role as a prayer counselor, and try to understand what they go through. And if they don't feel comfortable, open up to me. I'll be like, next time, we'll talk about it next time. But yeah.
Okay. So tell me, have you heard of persons who do self-harm?
Yes, I've heard of people doing self-harm. I've seen some of my peers doing some of the actions of self-harm. I did question it at times, but at the same time, I didn't know what to really do or say to them in that particular moment. Maybe if it happened now, then I would say something.
Why? Why now?
Well, during the time I've seen it, from then to now, I've matured a little bit, and I've known how to take a better approach to the situations. Before, I'll sometimes have the tendency to maybe like, I don't want to say bash them, but kind of have like argument kind of thing, or tone of voice. Like, why are you doing this? You shouldn't be doing that. You should be doing this instead. That would have been me back then, but now I'm more of an open person and to understand why.
So you attend MCC. Do you know of any young people who partake in self-harm?
Yes, I have friends who harm themselves from time to time.
How does that make you feel? What do you think about it?
Well, it makes me feel uncomfortable and sometimes sad to see that they don't have like a safe space or someone who they trust to talk to the point that they have to harm themselves to find comfort to what they're going through.
Is it boys or girls doing that?
Girls.
Have they told you why they're doing that?
No.
Have you asked?
I asked, but they didn't feel comfortable sharing, so I just give them words of encouragement and let them know that I am proud of them and stuff like that.
One of the things that we're turning a blind eye to is that of cutting, which seems to be on a rise in Grenada. Speak to that for me, Dr. Stephen. Have you heard about that, and what could parents do?
So, in terms of cutting, we wouldn't call cutting suicide, all right, or an attempt sometimes. I think it's where we call it a self-harm behavior, and we have to go into why people cut, right? And some folks that I've had in my office is where they cut to feel some sort of release, some sort of the pressure, the anxiety, they want some sort of release from that. And so the cutting provides some sort of release for them, right? And so we have to go into what is the need, why are you cutting, right? And now that's different from suicide ideation, where there's the thought that I do not want to be here. I don't want to see tomorrow. If I die, then it'll be better. Everybody will be better off, right? Thoughts like that are what we consider suicide ideation, right? And so suicide ideation is kind of one of the first steps that we need to address when it comes to suicide prevention, right? Now cutting might be on a whole different line, where it's somebody's not cutting to kill themselves, or someone not cutting to complete suicide, but they're cutting for another reason completely.
Okay, so when you talk about suicide ideation, I have heard a young lady, 13, 14-year-old, say on a number of occasions, I will kill myself, I will kill myself. And then she would just laugh. And the mother would be like, stop the stupidness, right? And as someone who lives with a mental health condition and is pretty much aware about this sort of conversation and this sort of talk, it raised flags, but I am not, I should say, I cannot speak to be heard or to be taken seriously, you know? But there are young people who might be having such conversations. And to me, that young lady was a cry for help, you know?
And every cry for help should be answered, right? So when she's saying, I'm going to kill myself, we should actually take it seriously. It is where, when we think about, in hindsight, if the young lady completes something, then we look at her and say, oh, she was crying for her. But in terms of our awareness now, that if we take everything in terms of serious consideration, then we will look and say, okay, well, talk to me. When we think about suicide prevention, we think of one of the major things we talk about in suicide prevention training is listening, right? Hearing the person. Because when someone is crying for help, they want to be heard. And that listening is one of the first steps in how we prevent suicide from happening, how we prevent somebody's completing suicide. Because there's some myths when it comes to suicide. For example, that if we ask somebody about if they're going to kill themselves or if they're having thoughts of suicide, that's going to bring it in their mind. That's a myth. But the fact of the matter, if somebody's already contemplating suicide, it might be that they want someone to hear them, to say, I see your pain. I understand that you're going through something, and we can solve it. Because when you think about suicide prevention, somebody's is wanting to complete suicide because they want to solve a problem. They think suicide is going to solve the problem. And the fact of the matter, suicide may not solve the problem, as we know, because it leaves a lot of loss, a lot of emptiness with the family and with the friends that are remaining.
You know, listening to you speak, what comes to mind, you know, when Mr. Duncan, I have elevated you to a doctor, so maybe that's, you know, that's the universe speaking through me. But Mr. Duncan, you spoke about you getting help from your work and you having conversations with your brother, was your brother able to have a therapist in Grenada? Was he exposed to that?
Um, I know he I don't think that, I'm not sure in terms of the therapy, but he was seeing a psychiatrist. Well, that's the one who prescribed the medication to him. But I didn't think there was much more than that. I know in Cuba he would have received assistance for sure, and also in Washington D.C. when he was there, he would have had like counseling along.
I
But
think, yeah,
in
go ahead.
Grenada, I'm not
No.
sure. I think this is something that we really need to address in Grenada, because what has happened, I guess, there'll be a suicide. There were a couple pretty high-profile ones recently in Grenada, and I remember a member of the bar association reaching out to me because we were pretty close friends and talking about it. But then, I guess as the months go by, then that conversation just it goes away, and it's not really kept at the forefront until something happens again. But as I said too, I'm pretty, in terms of understanding with Grenada, and I mean the myths and everything like that. The mental illness only really came to the forefront in North America when the wife of the former vice president, Tipper Gore, came out and said, well, she suffered with postpartum depression, and then all of a sudden, it became a conversation, and people started to think about it. And even now in Canada, here in North America, September is a month of mental illness, and workplaces, my workplace, is very, very concerned about your mental state. And there's a conversation about it, and I think there's more resources being put towards mental health, because funny enough is based on the reason being based on productivity that's been lost to the
Yes, but trillions of dollars are being lost.
Yes,
because of mental health conditions. Yes.
Yes. So this is, I think, this is part of the reason why I guess even the
Where the
insurance
money
companies.
goes.
Yes, exactly. Money talks. Everything else runs. Works. So and that, I think that's the main reason that started to drive it as a discussion. People more aware of it. How you get up, you get in the morning, you get a email from the company. How are you feeling today?
Really?
So yeah. So it has come a long way from the time before. And as I said to when Asquith passed, this is what we wanted to do. We wanted to make it a conversation, because people who know him, it's outgoing and everything, and there were all these questions, there were many, many questions, gossipy questions too, and and people, in terms of having understanding of triggers. There are things that can trigger depression. You lost your parents. I lost my parents 42 days apart. But so that sort of during that time you have that that period of sadness and stuff, but that is temporary. In that sense, I mean, they live a big long life. So that having that understanding, but I think we need to be able to talk about it and be free to really speak about it. And and then some of the terminologies in Grenada, you're going up in the pink house,
and I think that the color of the building has changed for a while,
they call it the crazy house, and and we always we have an understanding that people on triggers, things could trigger depression. These are triggers, but the cause itself could be deeply ingrained in us in terms of whether it's hereditary or other issues. But as I said, we need to speak about it, and know and treat it as an illness, as opposed to, somebody just crazy or whatever.
So to both of you, before we wrap this up, that mental health is an ongoing topic, and there are so many areas to look into, and we're going to talk about it again. So I might be reaching out to both of you again. But what would you say? My question, my last question, and if you want to add anything extra, what would you say to someone who might be viewing this and is so depressed or whatever's going through so much, is actually contemplating suicide, and as the brother of someone who died by suicide, what would you say to that person?
I said to that person, I speak to someone who is close, the difficulty though is when the mindset at that time is that somebody who's deeply depressed is that it's not the same person. So it's pretty hard for them to even understand, or even to sit down and to relate to somebody. As I told you, when my brother is in that position, when he's going through depression, he sees darkness. It could be the brightest day. He can see that one cloud. So I think the really, really, really the onus is on folks who are very, very close. Like, you have to be your brother's keeper. You have to pay attention to your friends. They have to come from the friends. When my brother passed, everybody, there was like, what ifs. There were so many what ifs. His closest pal, Ken Martin Whiteman, said, I passed by the St. Paul's police station that morning, and I wanted to go down to West Hall, and if I, there's so many questions that, what if, that I'm like, okay, it's not today, but may have stopped something today, but that is not the route. I wasn't gonna, stop him from doing what in his mind, which is at the sense that the thinking is not normal. It's abnormal thinking, So I just think the closest thing really is the people who are close to pay attention. Pay attention to the family, the children, the friends, and to just keep speaking to them. It's not. I'm telling you, it's not easy. It is not easy dealing with somebody who is deeply depressed. To have a conversation with someone who you try. It doesn't matter how positive you are. You try to have all these positive conversations, and they will see when all they're seeing is darkness. It is pretty tough. It's pretty tough on you, for you not to fall, as I said, get that monkey, the monkey on your back, to be able to just not put that monkey on your back. It's not easy, but as I said, friends, family, and counseling. In Grenada, I guess, I think we need more people to go, and we need more professionals to go, even colleges in Grenada to go and study for counseling. And it's an area that is needed not in Grenada, but I guess throughout the Caribbean, throughout the world.
Thank you so much. Dr. Stephen, you're in the field.
Yes.
What would you
and
say?
I agree with Mr. Duncan in terms of when someone is going through and they're suicidal, they're sometimes they're not thinking in a logical, rational way, right? And so if you can get help, right? That would be speak to someone, tell them that, hey, I am experiencing these thoughts and I want to kill myself, right? The onus, I think, is on those of us that are around, the family, the friends, the loved ones that know the person when they see a change in behavior. I know that a change in behavior doesn't mean that they are going to sell all their stuff, but it might be a change in behavior in terms of how they're feeling that day, right? Or you notice something different, and ask the question, right? It's sometimes we're uncomfortable, I think, asking the question, are you thinking about killing yourself? Get comfortable asking that question, especially if you're dealing with someone who is experiencing depression, right? And they're deep in it. And so, do you have a plan, right? And then connect them with resources that can help them, right? So we talk about questioning, asking the question, persuade in terms of getting them help and referring them to professionals or a place where they can get help. So it's important, I think, that we get comfortable being each other's keeper and saying, hey, are you thinking of harming yourself? What talk to me, what's going on? I'm here to help you. We can get through this. Right? So that connection and support, I think, is so important.
And you said, telling a friend that, I'm thinking about killing myself. It should not bring from the other person. We're talking about what's chopping this is that why take a drink, let me go and do this. That kind of push, putting it, just sweeping it away like that is nothing. But that sometimes is a reaction you get from some people. What stupidness is that? Boy, watch. Just go and sit down. That kind of thing.
And I think that speaks to one of the risk factors of suicide, right? Isolation. If someone doesn't know what's going on with you, someone close to you doesn't know what's going on with you, it's much harder for you to seek help. If you can have a trusted friend who really understands what you're going through, right? I think that is important. It's important that you develop a support system that you can depend on, that you can say to them, hey, I'm having a rough day today, right? I'm having these thoughts. And I think we kind of put that aside, but it's important to develop a support system, especially when you're having mental illness.
Yes, that is true because I can speak to that. I live with a mental health condition, and if it were not for my friends who stand by me, who understand me, not pity me or try to whatever, they respect me and allow me to be me, yet at the same time they would check in like, Judy, you'd be like, you're taking a medication, right? And it's not like she's minding my business or anything, but she's just like making sure that I'm taking care of myself. And as you know, it was pointed out, it's not just about medication. It's a whole list of things. As I do the things I love. I can speak for myself. I do the things I love. I sing, I write, I talk to people, I laugh. So it's not just not just one thing. And again, it's not a one size fit all when it comes to mental health conditions, because what works for me might not work for you, because we're all different at the end of the day, and so trying to tell somebody, well, do this, do that, do that. They have to, that's where counseling comes in. The counselor will help you find what works for you. And that is something.
I think one thing I want to speak to in terms of Mr. Duncan mentioned that his brother had changed medication in a couple of weeks before he completed suicide. Sometimes medication can actually give you the opposite effect of what is planned. So some medication actually increase suicide ideation. So it's important if you are taking medication and you're going through a medication change or regimen, that you need to be even more vigilant in those times to crank up your support system, whether you see the doctor every 2 weeks or 3 weeks, but be very alert and mindful how the medication is affecting it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Stephen and Mr. Duncan. I love this conversation. We can talk forever, but there must come an end. However, I will be knocking on your doors again, especially Dr. Stephen. So I have your number, so you won't be able to duck from me, and I know where you work. So, unlike Mr. Duncan, who's far away. So I will be knocking on your doors again.
Mass is being brought to you by the National Lotteries Authority.